Before starting this video, go ahead and leave a like and comment down below if you're into Sekai or not. I'm bringing you another one here, a fantasy world just the way you like it, with dragons, demon kings, and all the bizarre and awesome stuff these fantasy worlds have, so let's not waste time. Let's go. It all starts with Yugiri having a dream about Jin, who met Asaka, his adoptive mother. That day, Asaka went for a job interview at a research center, but when she looked at the contract, she noticed a very strange clause saying she couldn't complain if the job ended up killing her. She even tried to leave, but the people there forced her to sign anyway. She thought the place might be some kind of evil organization base, but Yukio, the guy interviewing her, tried to calm her down. While they were in the elevator, Asaka wanted to know more about the job, but Yukio said her task would be to take care of a monster. She was really surprised, and Yukio explained that the institute ran cursed experiments. As soon as they got to the underground floor, she noticed how dark it was and how the doors were full of weird inscriptions. Yukio said it was ancient writing, and she asked where he was taking her. He said it was to her new workplace. After getting in another elevator, he asked if she had heard of an Alpha Omega. Since she hadn't, he explained that Alpha Omega meant everything or eternity, and that was the name of the being she would be taking care of. Asaka asked if it was a human being, but Yukio said he didn't know because he had never seen it. The Alpha Omega could eliminate anything just by thinking. Asaka couldn't believe they wanted her to take care of a monster like that, but Yukio said she was chosen because she had a teaching license. She realized that was the only reason they picked her, but Yukio insisted, saying that if she didn't accept, a tragedy could happen to all of humanity. He said the only way to avoid that was by giving the boy a good education. Asaka tried to argue, saying there were people more qualified, but Yukio insisted that she was the right one. When they finally reached the last floor, she saw a giant vault door. Yukio said he couldn't go past that point, and handed her the instruction papers. He wished her good luck and left through the elevator. Asaka used a card to unlock the vault, and when she stepped inside, she realized the place was nothing like she imagined. She followed a map and reached a house, but didn't find anyone inside. Then suddenly, she heard a noise coming from another room and opened the door. There, she saw that the Alpha Omega was just a little innocent boy. Even though she was shocked, she complained that everyone was scared of a simple child and picked him up. She walked outside with him and threw him on the ground, telling him to be a normal boy and play outside. The boy didn't understand anything, but pointed a finger at her. She got scared, remembering he had the power to destroy anything just by thinking. Then out of nowhere, she heard something falling and saw a strange shadow on the ground. The boy revealed that it had been hiding in her shadow just to get in. She asked what it was, and he replied that it was a demon, and that those creatures always showed up there trying to kill him. Asaka got kind of confused, and the boy said he could go play outside, but asked to leave it for tomorrow, since it was already getting dark. Asaka remembered that after all the stress and helped him stand up. She introduced herself and asked his name, and he said they called him Alpha Omega. After that, he said he was hungry, and then she realized she'd have to cook for him too. She checked the fridge and noticed she didn't really know how to cook. After looking around the kitchen, she found some instant noodles and gave them to him. The boy tasted them and said he liked it, but Asaka was still thinking about his name. She asked about his parents, but he had no idea what that even meant, and she apologized. Looking at him, she thought of a puppy and decided to name him Yogiri. The boy asked if Yogiri Takato sounded good, and Asaka thought it was strange that he used her last name, but realized he didn't even know what a family was. She let him use her name and taught him how to greet people with a handshake. Later, Asaka was preparing breakfast and got upset because the agency didn't send a rice cooker. She tasted the food and got shocked by how bad it was, but still served some to Yogiri, who tried it and complained a lot. He said the food was bad and sticky, and she was shocked that was all he had to say after all her effort. He said he couldn't compliment it because it tasted awful, and she told him to be quiet. She also told him that a man shouldn't complain about food made by a woman, because that's really rude. Yogiri didn't understand anything, but she insists that he eats everything and says it tastes good. Yogiri ends up giving in, eats it all, and says it was delicious. After that, Yogiri is solving some problems while Asaka hears someone arriving at the house. She wonders who it is, and the boy thinks it must be the delivery guy. Asaka carefully opens the door and sees a girl holding the bag. She asks who it is, and the girl replies with a robotic voice that she came to deliver the groceries. Asaka, realizing it's a robot, starts wondering if it's really a good idea to let Yogiri grow up in a place full of robots. She even asks the girl to bring some more things for him. Yogiri tells her he already finished the task, and she notices he finished earlier than expected. So she decides to take him outside, getting excited by what she sees. She can barely believe all of that is underground. Yogiri comments about some things floating along the ground, and she explains it's because it's a cultivation area. Asaka feels that maybe she'll make it out of that place alive. When the month ends, Asaka delivers her monthly report, and her supervisor, Yukio, is surprised she held on for so long. She says she doesn't think she can keep going, because she doesn't believe she's capable of giving Yogiri the minimum necessary education. Yukio insists that she can handle it, but she says she'll need reinforcement. He replies it's not that simple, since other scholars always give up on the first day with Yogiri. Asaka remembers what she went through there and understands why others give up so fast. Yukio asks if she hates what she does, and she says she hates it a lot. She doesn't understand why she has to be locked up in a place like that, but Yukio says they'll reward her effort because she's valuable to them. He hands her a package, and she becomes intrigued. When she opens it, he explains it's the payment for the month. She replies that no amount of money will make her stay there, and Yukio says that if she wants, she can leave, and she's surprised since he never mentioned that. He asks if she's thinking about leaving, but she worries about Yogiri. Yukio says the robots will make the food for him, and she questions why it's her who has to cook for him, and he replies that it's because of the special touch of care. And at that moment, she asks for a vacation. Without warning, Asaka wakes up locked in a cell. She remembers going to the city, eating well, shopping, staying in a luxury hotel, but doesn't understand how she ended up there. She thinks she was captured, but hears a voice through a communicator saying they won't harm her. The voice explains their group deals with anomalies and protects the world by isolating threats, and they only want to talk. The next day, Yogiri asks the delivery robot where Asaka is. He says she went out on vacation, and Yogiri feels sad about it. He goes outside to read a book, wondering when Asaka will come back. He notices even his dog seems to miss her, and he decides to search by himself. He asks the robot where she is, but it doesn't know, so he tells the robot to call someone who knows where she is. But the robot explains it can't leave because the door won't open from inside. Somehow, Yogiri contacts the people in the control room and tells them to open the door. Everyone panics and rushes to inform Uki, who runs to the control room and finds everyone collapsed on the ground. He asks what happened, and a scientist explains that Yogiri is controlling the researcher, and anyone who tried to stop him died. Yukio is shocked to discover Yogiri's absurd power, and he orders security to shoot the scientist. But suddenly, he collapses himself. Yogiri walks in and questions Yukio about Asaka. Yukio says she went on vacation, and Yogiri wants to know when she'll return. Yukio says she won't return because she was taken by the agency. Yogiri asks if he'll help, but Yukio says there's no way, since the organization has influence all over the world and they're too powerless to act. Yogiri then decides to rescue Asaka and tells Yukio not to say anything about what happened. Yogiri arrives at the agency's base and destroys everything along the way, demanding to know where Asaka is. The people think his power is to eliminate whatever he sees and try to neutralize him before he sees them. They set up an ambush, but Yogiri defeats everyone. Asaka is frustrated. She couldn't get a regular job and wonders how Yogiri is doing. Suddenly, there's a commotion outside, and she takes the chance to try and escape. The door opens and a woman appears, pointing a gun at her head. This woman takes Asaka as a hostage, and Yogiri enters the room. He's relieved to see her again, but she gets scared. The woman threatens Yogiri, saying she'll kill Asaka if he tries anything. She keeps threatening him, but Yogiri uses his power and takes the woman's life instantly. Asaka is left completely confused and Yogiri runs up to hug her, saying that now they can go back home. They leave the place together, and Asaka is shocked by how much Yogiri destroyed there. She smiles at him to reassure him, and the two walk away together. After that, Asaka takes him home and goes to talk with Yukio in the garden. She asks what will happen after everything Yogiri did. Yukio replies that there's nothing to be done, and she's surprised there's no punishment for Yogiri's actions. Yukio says that now there's no way to let her quit the job, and she gets mad because he's laughing. Yukio says they'll make sure she's safe and asks if she plans to keep working. She says she's not thinking of quitting for now, since Yogiri might cause even more trouble if left alone. Asaka tells Yukio she still needs to pass on her final lessons to Yogiri, just to keep the boy satisfied. Yogiri asks to play a video game, and she says he'll get to play soon. After saying goodbye to Yukio, she runs into the house and realizes she left her purse back at the agency's office. Sometime later, we jump to the present, where Yogiri Takato, now older, is being shaken by his classmate Danara, who's in total panic. He wakes up and remembers she's the girl with the weird name and Danara really is a weird name. He asks if the field trip has arrived at its destination, and Danara says no and tells him to look around. Yogiri notices several classmates lying dead in a slimy puddle. He sees that one of them has been pierced by something strange and asks what it is. He looks out the bus window and sees something coiled outside. It might be a huge snake or a big cat, but to test it, he picks up the mic on the floor and throws it at the impaled classmate. The body doesn't react, but the thing that pierced him starts moving. Yogiri looks out again and realizes it's a giant dragon. The creature takes off, fills its chest to unleash fire, and charges toward the bus. At that moment, Danner grabs his arm in total despair. He ends up feeling her big soft boobs pressing against his arm, and that makes his brain click. He focuses his mind, opens a door, and says the word die, and the dragon just crashes instantly. Yogiri says they're safe now, but Danara doesn't get it. He pulls out his handheld console and tells her to calm down so he can explain. After she tells him what happened, he realizes a huge problem. In this world, there are no outlets to charge his game. He gets up and says Isaac mentioned the outside is safe now, and Danara asks if he did something. He says the dragon just dropped dead, and even knowing that, they decide to leave through the window. Outside, Yogiri surveys possible routes, hills, cities, or forests. Danara points at something in the sky and notices it's 3 classmates. Yogiri praises her eyesight and considers killing them. She's shocked, but he argues that they were left behind to die. Danara says that's not how you should talk, and he responds that those 3 might be hostile. The guys land nearby, surprised to see the dragon dead. One of them notices Danara is alive and laments it. He wanted to turn her corpse into a zombie to have fun. They argue about how creepy that is, and Danara realizes they can't be reasoned with. Suddenly, one of the guys fires a fireball. It passes close to hitting them, and then they introduce themselves. In this group, there's a healer, a hero good at offense and defense, and a cursed necromancer. The hero who launched the fireball demands Danara surrender. They all want to have fun with her, and she understands that her body is the target. Yogiri comments that she's brave for admitting that, and the necromancer complains about how close she is to Yogiri. He says he'll make the situation fair for a talk, points to the fireball hero, and says die, and the others laugh, but freeze when their friend drops dead. They ask what happened, and Yogiri explains that he just told him to die. He orders them not to move, but the necromancer tries to help his friend, so Yogiri says die again, and now the necromancer is also dead. Only the fat healer is left. Yogiri warns him that if he moves, he dies too, but promises to explain his power. He tells the healer to check if the others really kicked the bucket. The guy obeys and uses instant healing, but nothing changes. Danara concludes that Yogiri killed the dragon, but he didn't want to explain. She gets annoyed and says the healer is too slow and needs details. The healer complains that Yogiri went too far, and he replies that they attacked first. He finally reveals his ability. He causes instant death to any target. Actually, he doesn't even need to say die. Just thinking it is enough. The chubby guy says it's impossible, and Yogiri says he can prove it in practice. Yogiri notices Damon approaching, the chubby one pretending to be terrified. In reality, he tries to cast a spell, but Yogiri simply tells him to stop. He then explains that he has another ability. He can feel whenever someone wants to kill him, and he combines that with his instant death power. This boy here is just slightly overpowered, right? Damon starts crying, and Yogiri asks why they think they're powerful right after getting new abilities, so Damon reveals that the second time he and his two companions came to this world, they defeated the Demon Kingdom and went back home, where only a few hours had passed. Yogiri decides to kill him, but Damon begs Danara for help. She says she's only alive thanks to Yogiri, so the choice is his. Damon pulls out a slave collar and promises to become her servant, placing it around his own neck. Acting like a deranged pervert, he walks toward her, but she commands him to stop. The collar starts choking him, and she asks how she can stop being his master. He explains that control can be transferred, so she passes it to Yogiri, who spares his life, on the condition that he goes into the monster-infested forest, leaves all his items behind, and never mentions Yogiri or Danara again. Once the order is fulfilled, Danara questions whether this is safe. Yogiri says Damon would have betrayed them eventually, so this is better. She asks if he's not afraid she might report him, and he replies that it was he who asked to protect her. She ends up blushing and remembers that they barely even talked, and asks why he protects her. At first, he says he doesn't know, and after much insistence, he admits it's because of her personality. And she turns all red and upset, complaining that men are all the same. When they reach the city, Danara gets excited while Yogiri yawns. The guards tell them to wait for the Lord, who speaks Japanese and allows them to enter without charging. Since they are candidates for sages, he knows that, but still suggests Danara should stay the night at his house. She refuses and pulls Yogiri with her. Inside the city, she confesses that she feared Yogiri might kill the Lord. He finds it odd and asks if she thinks he's a serial killer. She replies that it's surprising he doesn't realize. That's the impression he gives. The city is filled with beast folk, and out of nowhere Myril appears a catgirl asking if they're sage candidates and if they're lost. Danara gets excited about her feline ears, but Yogiri wants to know what she wants. Myril says she wants to help for free, since candidates have a guaranteed future and are easy to seduce. She assures she won't try to seduce the boyfriend because friendship is essential, and Danara explains that they are not a couple. Yogiri asks Myril to give them a tour of the city before nightfall. After a long shopping spree, Danara celebrates her new look, but doesn't realize they're surrounded. Yogiri already expected it, and she apologizes for trusting Mei so quickly. Bandits appear demanding money, especially targeting candidates with no gift to be sold. Danara panics, but Yogiri remains calm and asks for permission to eliminate the bandits. The thieves start mocking, saying they'll be the ones to kill everyone there. Danara tries to warn Myril, saying Yogiri is much stronger than he looks. But even so, Myril thinks that's nonsense, since to her, two people without sage gifts are useless. But then Yogiri gives that deadly command and simply tells everyone behind him to die. Instantly, they all drop dead, and the other bandits are left confused. But Yogiri continues his task and tells the leopard man to be half dead. Only the man collapses completely, and Yogiri realizes there's no such thing as half dead. So he tries again, aims at the chicken man's ankle, and orders him to die. The guy falls too, but this time Yogiri thinks he missed the mark. He aims at a bear man's shoulder and tells him to die. The man drops as well, and Danara comments that Yogiri is being merciless. He says he even tried to hold back, and then orders the dog man's eyes to die too. The man goes blind instantly, terrifying everyone. Yogiri keeps mowing them down one after another, until Myril asks who he really is. Yogiri ignores her, thinking it's a waste of time to destroy them piece by piece. Myril tries to play the poor girl, saying her little siblings are waiting at home. But Yogiri responds that this doesn't justify stealing and killing others. The last bandit asks if he's really someone without any powers. But Yogiri just points at them and orders them to die once and for all. Only this time it doesn't work, and they remain alive, trying to run away. Danara asks if he's going to let them flee. Yogiri explains that he won't, he just gave the command with a delay. The two hide, but shortly after, death catches them too. Yogiri tells Danara that it's time to leave, But then the guards arrive, wanting to know what exactly happened there. Yogiri makes up a story, saying they were lost and just found everyone already dead. One of the guards says that won't work, because she saw everyone collapsing out of nowhere, right when they were about to attack the two of them. Danara is outraged, because that means the guards saw everything and still did nothing to help them. The guard explains that the plan was to catch the leader of the thieves as well. Yogiri realizes that their real objective was to let them get sold, so they could later track down the buyer. The guard confirms it and tells Yogiri that they can't really do anything, since they're immune to normal authority. Then one of the guards uses an analysis ability and discovers that neither Yogiri nor Danara have any special power. The girl is surprised, but in the end, this means that they can't be interfered with, since they don't have any powers at all. The man apologizes because his superior is too harsh, but Yogiri doesn't really care about that. He simply asks if they know a place to spend the night. They end up taking the two to a massive inn, which leaves Danara speechless, because the lodging looks like a castle. Yogiri asks if she's okay with sharing a room to save money, but she gets embarrassed, so he asks for 2 rooms next to each other. When Danara enters her room, she's startled by the sudden appearance of a spirit. This spirit turns out to be nothing less than an ancestral guardian of her family. Her name is Mokimoko, and she appeared to Danara because of the current situation. Danara questions why she didn't appear earlier, but Mokimoko argues that she was afraid of showing up recklessly in front of Yogiri. After all, he could erase her in a second, and she's afraid of him due to how extremely powerful he is. The next day, Yogiri notices she looks very tired, and she explains that it's due to everything that happened, and asks if they'll be able to find the rest of the group. Yogiri says he asked for help from Celestina, who works in that place. Since the day before, she's been working to find out where their group is. She's also in charge of preparing translation for the languages and the status concealment items. In addition, Celestina prepared something to let him carry the console. Celestina gives them the passes so they can enter the city, and Yogiri asks her to hold onto his belongings. After that, they travel by train, and Momoko is still afraid of Yogiri. Danara asks if he can see Momoko, and he explains that he only saw her after Danara mentioned her. Danara sits beside him and asks if they'll be able to find their companions, and Yogiri says that, according to Celestina, the others should be in the ancient forest training. Suddenly, Yogiri turns around and pushes her to the ground. An explosion destroys the roof of the train, and she's left in shock. An announcement tells the passengers to remain calm, because a sage is fighting an enemy. Yogiri assumes they are not the target, so apparently they're safe. But Danara has no idea what's going on. They look and see a giant robot, and Yogiri realizes that must be the enemy. Danara uses her sharp eyesight and says the sage is flying. The sage sends several attacks at the robot, but the fight is pretty balanced. Danara asks if Yogiri can take them down too, but he wants to know why. She says they're in the way, but Yogiri thinks that's a silly reason, because then he'd have to eliminate anyone who simply got in his path. She insists that they could have died, but Yogiri replies they weren't the target. He says he has some rules for using his power. Otherwise, he'd end up killing anyone who annoyed him. She apologizes for being a bit naive, and soon after, a huge attack comes toward them. Luckily, the robot ends up taking the hit and saves them. The sage complains that the robot moved and casts an ice spell. The passengers end up frozen, but Yogiri protects Danara. Danara calls the sage cruel, which irritates him a lot. Yogiri asks why he attacked, and the sage orders him to kneel and praise him like a dog. He begins insulting Yogiri, who responds in kind and threatens to finish him. The sage faints on the spot, and Danara asks if it was Yogiri who did that. He simply replies that he had a strong enough reason to do it, and the robot approaches, but makes it clear he didn't come to fight. He prefers to negotiate with Yogiri, offering him whatever he wants in exchange. Danara quickly realizes the robot is terrified of Yogiri, but Yogiri just asks if they have a way to return to their own world. The robot says he knows a path to return to the place he himself came from, but not to their original world. Yogiri asks if the robot could actually take them there, but the answer is no, since the robot isn't fully present in this world either. He doesn't want to risk bringing someone as dangerous as Yogiri back to his home. After that, the robot explains that this world is at a much lower level compared to the others that exist, and to ascend in level, it requires an absurd amount of energy and the exact coordinates. Yogiri then asks the robot to give him some hint on how to obtain that energy and those coordinates, so he can go back home. He also asks if Danara would like to request something, but who appears is her spirit, Momoko. Meanwhile, the two of them spend the night resting in the forest, where Momoko reveals that she turned her underwear into a katana. They keep walking until they arrive at the city of Hanabusa. Danara gets very excited, thinking that everything looks very similar to Japan. But she notices that Yogiri seems exhausted. He explains that it's normal, since he killed several enemies along the way. She doesn't quite understand, but when she looks back, she sees the monsters and bandits who tried to attack them. Danara wonders if the fact that he's tired means that his power has a limit. But Yogiri says that he can use his power as much as he wants, he just gets tired afterward. They enter the city, and Momoko notices there are magical barriers in place instead of normal walls. Danara looks around and sees the big hotel, remembering that the innkeeper had recommended one earlier. They decide to stay the night there, and as soon as they enter, they run into Yuki, his classmate. He's happy to see Danara, and she asks why he's there instead of with the rest of the class. Masaki says he separated from them because he thought the others were too slow to keep up. But one of the Meiji girls nearby clearly doesn't like Danara's presence. The guy even tries to calm the girl down, saying they're just classmates. The first Meiji calms down, but then another one already starts flattering him again. Danara is completely lost, just like us, and asks Yogiri if he understands what's going on. But he also has no clue. Yuki then introduces the Meijis, saying that now they are his protectors. In total, 5 girls are serving just this one guy. They all introduce themselves, but take the opportunity to start pressuring Danara. She doesn't understand any of it, and Yuki apologizes, saying he doesn't know how to be firm with girls. He tells everyone to be quiet, and Yogiri asks Danara if this guy also abandoned them before. Yogiri says he has no idea what Yuki's power is, but he can tell Yuki thinks way too highly of himself. But Danara reveals that he's always been like that, surrounded by girls and totally full of himself. Yogiri is surprised, saying that school life was more entertaining than he remembered. Out of nowhere, the guy starts talking about destiny and asks Danara to be his girlfriend. He says it's sudden, but even so, she's shocked, and he insists, telling her not to worry about Yogiri. He even casually mentions that he's not into guys, but could make an exception for Yogiri. Danara is speechless, and so are we. The guy keeps insisting, until Yogiri says he doesn't feel even a drop of killing intent in the air, just awkwardness. Danara asks where all this confidence comes from, and Yuki reveals that his class is domination, meaning he can control anyone weaker than him. And she's still surprised to learn that he hasn't even leveled up as much. It all started at a party after the first massacre mission, when Otori showed up to give him some advice. Otori's class is Consultant Master of Guidance and Problem Solving. Otori explained that everyone avoided Yuki because of his domination class, and that if no one became a sage, the whole group would end up as cattle. So he suggested Yuki buy several level 1 servants, the cheapest available. These servants could fight for him, and if they defeated enemies, those enemies would also become slaves, and everyone would gain XP. Yuki says he had never seen any of that listed in his abilities. But Otori explained that, as a consultant, he could see secret details in others. Yuki asked why Otori decided to help him, but Otori just wanted to give them a chance to become sages and wished him good luck. After hearing all of that, Danara thinks that support classes are seriously overpowered in this world. Yogiri notices that as the conversation goes on, Yuki's number of servants and his level keep rising. Yuki confirms that, and once again asks Danara to be his girlfriend. She refuses, and he tells her to think it over and give him an answer later. He leaves, and Danara comments that he's unbearable. Even so, Yogiri thinks it might be safer for Danara to stay by Yuki's side. Danara asks if he's trying to annoy her, but Yogiri doesn't understand her reaction. After that, Yogiri is relaxing in his bed, while Danara is wondering how much longer they're going to be stuck in that place. Suddenly, she notices smoke rising through the streets. That's happening because the man who, in addition to everything, asked to look after Yogiri is arriving in the city and causing destruction everywhere he passes. This guy announces that his immortal army is recruiting and that anyone who dies will be turned into a zombie soldier. Danara decides to call Yogiri's room to wake him up, but Momoko replies, saying she's relying on him too much. And meanwhile, the phone keeps ringing while Yogiri is dreaming about his childhood, remembering the dog licking his face and his grandmother calling him to come eat breakfast. He soon wakes up, answers the phone, and says he'll head over to Danara's room. As soon as he steps out, he notices the hallway is empty except for an invisible table, which appears along with a girl wielding a dagger. Yogiri closes his eyes to sense the killing intent and sees the girl. Realizing she intends to attack Danara, he uses his ability and the girl collapses on the floor. He enters Danara's room and tells her that someone was just outside trying to kill her. Danara doesn't understand why she would be the target, but Yogiri calls the front desk to report that someone has fainted in the hallway. Danara asks why he did that, and he replies that if he didn't report it, he'd look suspicious. Meanwhile, Yuki receives a notification saying that the maid has disappeared from the radar, but right now he has to deal with another monster inside the building. Back at the hotel, Danara realizes the girl was one of Yuki's maids, and Yogiri finds all of it quite problematic. He asks Danara to gather her things so they can leave, and she agrees, though he's surprised at how calm she is in this situation. Danara says she's gotten used to seeing people dead around him, and Momoko comments that humans are bound to die anyway, and that her family shouldn't be shaken by that. Danara gets annoyed and tells Momoko to quit it with the philosophical nonsense. They start running, but another one of Yuki's maids shows up, asking where they're going. Yogiri wants to know what she wants, but the girl casts a spell that traps him inside a crystal of ice. She proudly says that her boss ordered her to take Danara to him, but Yogiri simply punches through the ice and walks out unharmed. The girl and Danara don't understand what just happened, since the crystal was supposed to be unbreakable, but Yogiri says he killed the ice and it worked. Danara is confused and asks what he means by killing ice, and the Meiji panics and begins casting more spells, but Yogiri erases both her magic and her wand. The girl falls to her knees, and he explains that he can destroy anything he thinks about, so she should cooperate and answer his questions. She agrees, and he asks if she can use magic without her wand. She says that with her class, it only works if she's holding one. Yogiri figures she must have other wands hidden. The girl confirms and pulls out another wand from between her breasts. Danara asks why she's hiding one there, but also tells Yogiri not to stare so hard at her chest. He's surprised because he didn't think she could use wands that way. After that, he brings up how she wanted to take Danara to Yuki and asks about the others. She says they all received the same order, but suddenly a girl appears on the ceiling and tries to attack Danara. Danara uses judo techniques and throws her down. Yogiri is surprised, but Momoko comments that Danara's martial talents are starting to awaken. However, they realize the girl that showed up was actually a puppet. Other dolls start surrounding them, and the girl pulls another wand from her hair, saying she thought she could handle this alone. Yogiri's eyes flash, and she drops dead on the spot. The Meiji controlling the dolls is sitting on the stairs and orders them to finish the two off, but asks them to spare Danara. Still, Yogiri destroys all the dolls effortlessly, and the girl is terrified. They manage to figure out where she is, and she begs for her life, which makes Danara feel like they're the villains in this story. While Yuki senses once again that his servant has died, the little maid girl gives up on fighting and starts explaining everything to Yogiri and Danara. After hearing everything, she warns the other maids that Yogiri can kill anything just by thinking about it. No one believes it, but Yuki prefers to watch and lead them to a place where they can try to set up an ambush. Danara and Yogiri head down the stairs and find everything covered in cockroaches. She screams in terror, and when Yogiri is about to say the name of the insect, she begs him not to say anything or she'll be traumatized. Momoko realizes that Yuki is using insects to keep watch on them. Danara asks if Yogiri can eliminate those cockroaches, and he says yes, but they'll all fall on top of them. She refuses that idea, but Momoko comments that the insects could crawl into her mouth and end up suffocating her. Just thinking about that, she decides she's going to get revenge on Yuki, And Momoko adds that Yuki might end up turning the entire world into his enemy. Yuki observes everything, believing that Yogiri doesn't stand a chance of doing anything. He considers releasing the cockroaches to scare him and chasing him down. But the maids warn him, saying he should be more careful, since no one really knows what Yogiri's power is. Even so, he insists and orders the cockroaches to eliminate Yogiri. Danara gets very anxious with all those cockroaches, and Yogiri comments that he could just end Yuki, because it doesn't seem like it would take much effort. He uses the cockroaches' killing intent to locate Yuki and commands him to die. Yuki collapses on the floor, leaving his servants in shock, but even after that, Danara is terrified because nothing has changed. The cockroaches are still there, and Yogiri explains that he never fails. His enemies can reach him, and he can also reach them. Danara realizes that the cockroaches became even more agitated, and he explains that it's because Yuki's death has set them free. She panics, but he grabs her arm and tells her to run. Meanwhile, Yuki's maids are still trying to bring him back to life, and one of the maids tells the other that they're free now and walks away. Yogiri and Danara go through an alley to try to escape the city, but suddenly they hear screaming. When they look, they see the city is overrun with zombies. The undead have started terrorizing the city, and Danara is completely lost, not understanding what's happening. But Yogiri says that since the zombies are really slow, they can escape if they act smart. Danara asks if there's no way they can help, but Yogiri says saving the city won't be easy at all. Momoko suggests they should leave before the situation gets even worse. Meanwhile, Mayor Ryoka is complaining about Mayasuke, who released the zombies into the city. He explains that Len, the vampire sage, was the one who handed him the city's administration. Mayasuke replies to the mayor not to worry, because now it's Len's era, the era of the sage candidates. The mayor says that Mayasuke is already dead and turned into a zombie, so he should gather the undead and leave. But the man reveals he's simply following Len's orders. He demands the mayor hand over the city key, and since it's a direct command, the mayor ends up handing it over, asking what's going to happen next. But Mayasuke says it's nothing major, and then he uses the sound system to command the zombies to stop. He introduces himself to the entire population, and shows photos of Yogiri and Danara on a huge screen. He announces that they are being hunted, and everyone who's still alive must bring them to the main square within 1 hour. And if no one does, he'll release the zombies again. At that moment, Yogiri and Danara were trying to quietly leave the city. They hear everything and realize the man locked everything up so no one can escape. And everyone now understands they only have 2 options. Either hand over Yogiri and Danara or become zombies. The mayor enters the room where Mayasuke is speaking, angrily confronting him about threatening the population. Mayasuke replies that if he didn't make threats, no one would bother to go looking for them. And now the whole city sets out to hunt them, and the 2 are forced to hide in the alleys. Danara thinks that the humans have become even more dangerous than the zombies now, but Yogiri says it's better to run and avoid being found. Danara asks why they're being hunted, and Yogiri thinks for a moment before saying it's probably because he defeated the other sage. Suddenly, 3 girls find them and say they're going to capture the 2, even if they have to kill them. Yogiri is surprised at their speed and warns that if they come closer, he'll kill them right there. One of them ignores the warning, and Yogiri makes her drop stiffly to the ground. The others panic, and Danara starts complaining, saying that's a disgusting way to keep promises. Yogiri replies that since they want to kill them, it's only fair that they end up dying too. He sees the other 2 girls running away, and realizes that Mayasuke is only doing this because he believes Yogiri wouldn't dare kill ordinary people. Yogiri says he's truly irritated now and decides to go to the square to deal with Mayasuke directly. They head there, and the atmosphere is completely dark and grim. Danara thinks this is the most fantastical thing she's seen in this world so far. When they get close, Yogiri asks who Masayuki is. The guy doesn't recognize them at first and asks if they've come because they gave up trying to run away. He calls them boring for trying to sacrifice themselves for others. But Yogiri quickly calls him an idiot. Danara panics at that, and Masuki asks what Yogiri wants, saying that if he dies here, it's game over. Yogiri says what he really wants is just to catch the train and head to the kingdom's capital. So it'd be nice if Masuki could just remove the barrier around the city. Masayuki is stunned when he hears that, and immediately gets irritated, starting to complain, saying that Yogiri has no right to negotiate at this point. Yogiri realizes that's true and figures he should offer something in return. So he simply says he'll spare Masayuki, even though he knows that probably isn't a good deal. Masayuki becomes even more enraged, calls Yogiri a lunatic, and asks if he wants to die right there. He commands his immortal army to attack Yogiri, claiming there's no way to defeat someone who's already dead. But as always, Yogiri gives a single command, and everyone falls dead once again. The guy just killed something that was already dead. He's honestly unbelievable. Masayuki is left completely confused, and the mayor quickly says he's not responsible for any of it. Still in shock, Masayuki demands to know how the dead could die again. Yogiri answers that he doesn't really know either, but since the zombies were moving, they were alive in some way. Danara complains that Yogiri acted like nothing happened, but at least he gave a proper answer. Masayuki still can't believe what he saw, and Yogiri says that he's the one who decides who's dead and who isn't. Masayuki gets furious and calls for his master, Lane, but Yogiri just wants to know what he plans to do now that all his allies are gone. The man throws himself to the ground, unable to accept Yogiri's power, and starts transforming into a bizarre creature, something like half bat, half wolf. But Yogiri doesn't even let him finish transforming and activates his ability. Danara even complains because she wanted to see the full transformation, but Yogiri doesn't understand why he should wait. She then asks what he's going to do now since there's no one left to talk to. Yogiri says that's not his problem and heads over to the mayor. The mayor is terrified and begs not to be killed. He says he only wanted to protect the city, and Yogiri explains that he acted only to protect himself and Danara too. The mayor says it all happened because the sage Lane ordered Masayuki to take them down. When Yogiri asks for a name, Danara wonders if his real name isn't Sion. The mayor explains that Sion is also a sage, but the one in charge here is Lane. Danara is really confused because they were brought to this world by Sion, who told them to become sages themselves. And now another sage is trying to kill them, which makes everything very suspicious. Mokumoku says she doesn't know much about it and doesn't get involved with sage candidates. She tries to speak with Yogiri, but he already senses a type of spiritual magic coming toward them. Yes, Yogiri senses several killing intents all around the plaza. People begin to gather, making the atmosphere even tenser. The mayor checks Masayuki's body and says that if they're using spiritual magic, the barriers should be protecting them. He tries using the key, but it doesn't work, and that's when they realize that Lane is now controlling the barrier. Danara asks if Yogiri can eliminate whoever is giving the orders and possessing the citizens. He says the situation is completely different from what happened with Yuki. He starts killing everyone who tries to attack them, and people fall one after another. He feels like it's a test, like the ones they used to give him when he was younger. Yogiri notices the mayor growing more desperate as the city's people keep dying. He also notices the killing intent growing stronger and suddenly sees the shadowy attacker arriving. This massive being destroys everything in its path, and everyone begins to panic. Meanwhile, Lane says his copies know nothing about Yogiri, and they don't have any intent to kill him. So he orders the clones to attack the city if the shadowy being tries to fight or ends up being defeated. Danara asks Yogiri if he can kill that enemy, and he says yes, which shocks her because she didn't expect that. The mayor begs for help, asking Yogiri to save the city, but Yogiri remains cautious. Still, he commands the darkness to die, and during that moment, he realizes the city is being attacked from above. He saves Danara from being hit, and she wonders if the attack came from the shadowy enemy. Yogiri says he already took care of that enemy, but this aerial strike blended with evil energies so it wouldn't be detected. He notices the attack doesn't even have a specific target. It was made to destroy everything indiscriminately. He thinks it's all just another test, but Danara tells him to stop enjoying the softness of her chest and get off her. They get up, and Yogiri admits he has no idea what's going on. When he looks up, Danara says she sees several women in dresses falling from the sky. The mayor realizes this is all the work of Lane, and Danara asks if Yogiri can do anything against him. He says he can't, because they're not targeting him, and they're moving so fast that he can't even locate them. In other words, all of this was planned to nullify his power. Since they're all identical, Danara asks how many clones exist. The mayor reveals that they're all clones because Lane has the ability to regenerate. and after that, Yogiri says he can handle it, but it would be way easier if she were focusing on him. The mayor then projects a hologram of the city and shows that there's a pattern in the attacks. The attacks never happen twice in the same spot, nor are they close to each other. Mokimoko mocks Lane, saying she tried to randomize the attacks but ended up creating a pattern by accident. Danara realizes they can take advantage of this logic to try predicting the next strike. The mayor quickly figures out where the next attack will be, and Yogiri immediately says he's heading there. The mayor offers to help by using his teleportation, but Danara insists on going along too. Yogiri tells her to hide, but remembers that only she has the complete view of everything. Mokimoko also wants to help, so she decides to teleport with them. Yogiri and Danara hold hands, and she teleports them directly to the place where the clone will strike. He tells the clone to die, and the spirit puts up a barrier around them, and after everything passes, the shield disappears and Danara breathes a sigh of relief, thinking she wouldn't survive that. Yogiri notices something strange in her hand and asks what it is. In short, Mokumoko used her power to fuse Danara's underwear with the power of the last attacker, turning it into a magical armor. But Mokimoko is a bit uneasy, since eliminating the clones won't solve the real problem. Yogiri says it's alright. The clones fall and vanish, leaving Lane puzzled as to how immortal vampires can be defeated. Her maid comments that maybe they shouldn't chase after Yogiri, but Lane insists, saying she'll just make new clones with different parameters. Suddenly, Lane feels something strange and realizes her real body, which was in another dimension, has been defeated. She then makes a suicide jump, but still believes she can save the girl. She disappears out of nowhere, and Danara notices the attacks have stopped, so they return to the mayor to get ready to escape the city. When they return, the mayor thanks them for the help and gives them a car, recommending caution. As soon as they get in the car, Danara complains to Yogiri for playing video games instead of driving. He says he always crashes into walls when he plays, so he'd rather not even try to drive. When Danara takes the wheel, the spirit reveals that her family has a strong tradition in driving anything. While they're crossing the canyon, Danara wakes Yogiri up to tell him there's a giant boulder blocking the road. She says he slept the whole time, but he explains he used a lot of energy in the last city. Then Yogiri asks an important question. Why the hell are they even going to the capital? Danara is shocked, saying he could have asked that before they left. Yogiri explains that the goal is to return to Japan, and for that they need to find Xian. But he thinks maybe he can contact him without actually going to the capital. Danara argues that their classmates are heading there, so she tries to find another route to the capital, but ends up crashing into something unexpected. When they get out to check, they find a dragon ready to attack. Yogiri immediately orders the creature to die, and Danara feels relieved until she sees an absurd number of dragons flying toward them. Yogiri realizes they've entered the dragon's territory, and the dragons prepare to unleash their flames. Danara grabs his arm and begs him to act, since their killing intent is clear. Yogiri commands all of them to die, and dragons begin to rain from the sky. Danara compares the scene to a dragon poison commercial. She relaxes for a moment until she notices a massive shadow looming overhead. When she looks up, she sees a gigantic golden dragon, surrounded by thunder, staring at them. She panics, thinking she'll be fried and electrocuted by the monster, but Yogiri says he doesn't sense any killing intent from it. The dragon stares at them and says they've passed the test. Danara doesn't understand anything, but the dragon turns around and flies away. Still, Yogiri shouts for him to come back and asks why the dragons attacked if they can understand them. The dragon ignores him, so Yogiri warns that he could do the same to him. The dragon transforms and Danara finds her new look strange. Momoko says that's normal in Isekai worlds. Yogiri asks why the attack happened, and the girl says she just wanted to test if they were worthy of meeting the sword master. Yogiri and Danara don't quite get it, and she asks if they don't want to meet the holy sword wielder. The dragons say they don't really care and just want to continue their journey. The girl explains that the sword saint is just up ahead in the canyon, and whoever finds him may receive a gift. Basically, she's only there to test those who wish to meet him. The girl then starts talking about the sword master's abilities, saying he's as strong as the sages. Because of that, Yogiri believes he might learn something useful to return to their original world. But Danara thinks it's best not to change course now. since they're already completely lost. At that moment, the lowly dragon takes the chance to suggest a deal. She agrees to show them the way to the capital, but first, they must meet the swordsman. They agree to the deal, and she says her name is Atira. Soon after, they arrive at a crowded location. Everyone is waiting for the swordsman to appear, and people start grumbling, thinking they cheated by arriving in a vehicle. Yogiri doesn't understand anything, but Atira explains that today, a selection will take place to choose the Knight of the Holy King. In short, whoever earns that title becomes an apprentice of the Sword Saint, so people are eager to win that car. At that moment, a guy complains that they got eliminated even after trying so hard. But another replies that the selection hasn't even started yet, so no one's disqualified. That's when everyone notices the arrival of the Sword Saint. The old man says the first task is a survival battle, lasting until he says stop. Danara can't believe the old man is being serious, but Yogiri asks if he can just leave. Atira is confused, but the old man warns that if Yogiri leaves, then everyone else loses their chance. And then the slaughter begins, with everyone fighting each other while Yogiri and Danara just watch. Suddenly, a group decides to attack them, so Yogiri has no choice but to eliminate them. But a guy suddenly appears and says he'll protect them. He calls everyone idiots, saying they're misunderstanding the purpose of the Badagens. According to him, the test is to see who truly has the qualities to become the Holy King's Knight. Danara thought the guy was nice, and Momoko observes he's very skilled. The guy fights many opponents at once without even trying to kill anyone. Some people try casting magic at Yogiri, but he simply orders them to die. The protector is confused by their deaths, but guesses the old man must have punished those who went too far. As the chaos dies down, he tells the duo to wait there while he handles the rest. In the middle of that, they hear someone begging for help. He's crawling on the ground, cut in half, asking for a stone. Danara notices a colored stone nearby and gives it to him, and he uses it to regenerate. He thanks them, but soon after, the swordsman tells everyone to move on, as only a few remain. He enters the forest, and Danara isn't sure what to do. Atira asks them to stay and participate. Yogiri finds everything too suspicious. He thought they only needed to meet the swordsman. She explains that if her chosen candidate becomes the Holy King's Knight, then she becomes their servant. Yogiri already finds this situation boring, but since he hasn't gotten any real information yet, he decides to continue. Along the way, others introduce themselves, Ricky and Linnell. He says he only came because his friend forced him to participate. Then they see other participants disappearing, but Atira says it's just an invisible barrier. Inside, they find a massive tower, but Mokimoko tells Danara to get out of there. She senses an absurdly strong evil energy. At that moment, Linnell starts feeling sick, and the spirit explains it's due to the miasma. Danara is fine because she's protected. Meanwhile, Yogiri senses something odd around him. Linnell uses a stone and becomes immune to the miasma. Yogiri asks Atira if it's safe to enter the tower, but she's vanished. Ricky says only test participants can go in. They enter, take the elevator, and ride it to the top of the tower. There, the old man tells them to look down, and they see a massive energy sphere. The old man explains that what they're seeing is the end of the world. Looking closer, Danara notices the monsters frozen in time, as if locked in a huge battle. She sees a man in black robes and a woman in white right in the center. She tells Yogiri the woman's sword is piercing through both of them. Ricky explains those are the Holy King and the demon. The old man says his mission is to guard that place. Then suddenly, a girl named Frederica appears, saying everything will end if they defeat what's inside the sphere. Linnell reveals she's the friend who dragged him into this challenge. She tells the old man that his job ends today and launches a massive fire attack at the energy ball. She thinks it's over, but the blast barely does anything after hitting the sphere. The old man explains that time moves extremely slowly inside it, so it'll take centuries for the blast to reach the core, the Dark Lord. She's shocked, but the old man points to another girl to explain the next stage. The girl explains that the current challenge is to descend from the top to the first floor of the tower within 24 hours. Someone asks if they can just jump from the top, but she replies that it's only possible after collecting 100 points inside the tower. Danara notices there are new people among the participants, but doesn't care much and asks if Yogiri couldn't just eliminate the dark gods using his power. That's when he remembers he has no reason to do that. Danara observes Yogiri, who's clearly tense. He then confesses that he tried to eliminate the source of the miasma and accidentally killed the dark god. They decide to enter the tower to reach the lowest floor and escape from there. The other two try to follow, but Final's partner tells him to stop. She asks for his magic stones to recover her mana, but Lino says he can only activate them. Seeing that he's of no use to her, she throws the stone far away and complains about him tagging along when he's useless. Rick suggests they move forward. Once they enter the tower, they find several participants collapsed on the ground. He comments that the tower was supposed to be full of monsters and traps, but since they're the last ones, it should be easier. She warns them to watch for traps, but Lionel steps on one and is hit by a spear. Even so, he uses a crystal and quickly heals himself. Danara tells him to always keep a crystal in hand. They push the door open and find a girl dressed as a maid inside the room. Rick recognizes her as Teresa and asks what's going on. She charges at them using wires, saying that the Holy King's knight must be the strongest on the planet. Danara notices Rick trying to defend himself with his shield, but realizes Teresa is far more powerful and is just playing with him. Being the overpowered guy he is, decides to stop the game and commands Teresa to die. She drops dead on the spot, leaving everyone in shock. Even after the scare, Yogiri changes the subject and asks if that hand he found belongs to Lionel. Once the shock fades, Danara looks around and finds Lionel almost dying, desperately asking for a crystal. The group continues their journey to the 98th floor. There, a girl says that space is safe and they can rest there. Yogiri takes the chance to suggest they split up, but warns that they might have to fight each other in a trial. Rick agrees, saying he didn't imagine the test would be so intense. He asks if they'll be safe, and Yogiri replies that as long as he's with Danara, yes. Lionel says he wants to wait until midnight to recharge the crystals, but Rick decides to leave. Lionel asks for a room to sleep in, leaving only Danara and Yogiri. He asks if she wants to rest, but there's a problem. There's only one room. Yogiri goes in and finds a double bed. Danara reminds him that her ancestral spirit, Mokumoku, is always around, but Mokumoku tells her to enjoy the moment and hides in the wall. Danara starts to get nervous when she sees Yogiri casually changing clothes and putting on pajamas. He lies down and instantly falls asleep, leaving Danara stunned that he knocked out like that while in the same room as her. Mokumoku calls one of them to wake up, and it's Danara who wakes, seeing Yogiri completely knocked out. She gets up, and Mokumoku starts begging for help. Danara sees Mokumoku is stuck in the wall and asks what happened. Mokumoku says that when she saw Yogiri sleeping hugged up to her, she wanted to give them space, but got curious and tried to peek and ended up trapped in the wall. Danara complains, but Mokumoku explains the tower is sucking the souls of the dead into one single point. So the walls and floor try to absorb her. Yogiri wakes up, and Mokumoku asks for help. Hearing that, Yogiri tries to eliminate the absorption function of the tower. Mokumoku almost gets pulled in for good, and Danara starts saying goodbye to her. Yogiri shifts his focus from the wall to the right spot and activates his ability. Mokumoku manages to escape and is left wondering why souls are being gathered there. Yogiri suspects there's a hidden objective behind this trial. He tells Danara to stay alert because he'll eliminate anyone who shows hostility toward him without hesitation. She's a little surprised that's just how he always is. Yogiri says he's been trying not to kill everyone, but the other participants will try to kill them, so he can't hold back. Danara says she's been prepared for that for a while. She surprises him by saying that when he uses his power to protect her, it feels as though she herself is killing someone. So there's no reason to complain, he's only keeping her safe. Even so, she asks him to go easier on people, leaving Yogiri at a loss. He turns around saying he's starving and calls for room service. Yogiri and Danara keep moving up the tower, but he feels it's unfair to wipe out all the traps and puzzles like that. Suddenly, a random guy shows up telling him to stop cheating, and Danara asks where he even came from. The guy says his name is Iglesia, and he claims to be the one who created the tower, so he can appear wherever he wants. Danara says that's totally unfair, but Iglesia complains about how much work he put into designing so many traps just for someone to walk in and ruin it all. Yogiri replies that they just want to get out of there, but Iglesia cuts him off and says no one is allowed to leave the tower. He explains that the tower is what keeps the barrier sealed, holding back the dark god, so destroying the tower is not an option. Yogiri tries to make a deal. If they're released, nothing bad will happen, and he'll stop messing things up, but Iglesia doesn't buy it. He suspects Yogiri might actually be allied with the dark god. So Iglesia formally introduces himself as the Supreme Mage and tries to offer some options. But Yogiri tells him to drop dead and erases him on the spot. Danara is shocked and asks if that guy wasn't important. Yogiri replies that the guy was going to kill them anyway, so they might as well move on. Meanwhile, the Supreme Swordsman Urabe notices multiple alarms in the tower system, warning that the soul path has been destroyed. To make things worse, all the traps and puzzles are vanishing before they're even activated. The duo keeps going and arrives at an arena where they watch two people in battle. They notice a guy sitting on a throne with two girls by his side. He tells the bunny girl that her opponent is holding back, and she takes that as a cue to go all in. Danara watches the fight and spots Moko Moko, wondering what they're going to do. Yogiri decides there's no reason to get involved in someone else's fight, so they'll just slip by quickly. Danara sees that the exit door is right behind the throne, but the man insists that the fighters give it their all. The girl then decides to show her real power, revealing that she's part demon and saying she'll end it before the sword guy exposes her. She combines swordplay and magic, rushing the bunny girl. But the bunny girl drops her sword and fights barehanded. Her fighting style is close quarters brawling, not swordsmanship. Danara thinks that fight will never end, and Yogiri asks the guy if they can just pass through. The man on the throne asks who they are, but Yogiri simply says they won't get in anyone's way. The man blocks their path, saying the disciples don't have enough points. Yogiri says there's no point in fighting, since he and Danara only have 6 points combined. The guy flips out, saying that's exactly why they should fight because of the low score, but Yogiri couldn't care less, he just wants out. The man insists that no one walks away from the challenge, especially since he's enjoying the show. Yogiri checks with the other girl, and she gives them the okay, saying she doesn't mind. That gives the guy an idea to turn this into a 3-on-3 match. If Yogiri wins, they can move on. Danara gets nervous, saying there's no point trying to negotiate with Yogiri. He says no one listens to him anyway, and the half-demon girl tenses up, realizing the bunny girl is seriously strong, though she herself isn't weak either. But the guy reveals that, actually, the bunny girl is his weakest student. He introduces the girls and even says he wants to keep the half-demon and Danara for himself. His order is, kill Yogiri and leave the rest. But in the end, everyone drops dead as soon as Yogiri gives the word. Yogiri and Danara leave, but the man on the throne won't accept it and tries something, only for Yogiri to think about his death and finish it all right there. Danara notices but stays quiet. On their way out, the half-demon girl asks if Yogiri was the one who defeated everyone. He says yes, and she begs him for help. Yogiri hesitates, but Danara suggests they at least hear her out. The girl introduces herself as Theodosia and explains that she wants to find her sister, since she heard her people are being held hostage inside the tower. Danara thinks Theodosia is asking for backup, but Theodosia warns it might be seen as betrayal by the swordsman. Yogiri says the swordsman already sees him as an enemy after everything that's happened in the tower, and that he can't find her sister just using his power alone, but they can search together. Theodosia thanks him and says any kind of help is welcome. He asks if she has any idea where to start, and she says she senses that the underground might be a good place to look, feeling her people might be down there. Linnell, Rick, and Frederica arrive on the same floor, while Theodosia tries to stay out of sight. Frederica scolds Linnell for wasting time, and Rick tries to calm things down. Danara is relieved to see that Rick and Linnell are okay. She looks around and recognizes the place from before. The swordsman Urabe turns to see how many made it through, and he realizes only 17 managed to do it. He was just about to declare them knights when an emergency cuts him off. His assistants report that the tower has gone completely silent, and it's becoming difficult to maintain the first barrier. As they explain the chaos, a blinding light suddenly flashes, leaving everyone unable to see. After a moment, the brightness fades, and when they look up, they see a purple portal breaking through the barrier. Urabe's aides continue reporting the situation while Urabe arms himself, ready for trouble when out of nowhere, a demon comes crashing through the portal. Meanwhile, Yogiri, Danara, and Theodosia are going down a spiral staircase, but it seems endless. The spirit comments to Danara that maybe some barrier is distorting space. Yogiri suspects there might be something important at the bottom of those stairs. They keep descending, and Theodosia feels her people's energy growing stronger the further down they go. Danara asks Yogiri to break the barrier, but he says he can't, since it was probably created by Theodosia's own people. Suddenly, a scream rips through the barrier. Yogiri even thanks whoever did them the favor of breaking it, and right after that, a blue apparition passes through Danara. She's terrified, and Yogiri asks what scared her. She says it felt like a demon in the shape of a sword pierced right through her. Theodosia senses something strange and opens a hidden stone door in the wall of the staircase. She looks inside and is shocked by what she sees. The room is full of containers. Yogiri reaches the door and tells Danara to wait outside. He doesn't want her to see what's inside. Theodosia steps closer to one of the containers, and Yogiri asks if that's her people. She confirms it, shaken by seeing them in such a state, though she's relieved not to see her sister among them. Yogiri figures they were put in that condition so someone could extract their magical powers. Theodosia says she's going to end their suffering. She breaks one of the glass tubes, and they begin to emerge. Danara wants to know what the next step is, and Yogiri says they'll need to head back up before deciding anything. He asks Theodosia what she plans to do, and she says she's going after the Sword Master for revenge. Yogiri, Danara, and Theodosia leave the stairwell, and Danara quickly realizes the rest of the group is in trouble. The goddess has decided to destroy the core and bring her beloved back. She crushes the barrier's core, and it collapses, and at that moment, the Divine King appears to put an end to the demon god. Theodosia uses the distraction to defeat the Sword Master. The goddess is still in shock from losing her beloved, and the sword monster takes the opportunity to attack her. The monster disappears, and Lionel rushes to heal the goddess. As soon as she recovers, she starts acting like a completely unhinged deity. The demon hurries to retrieve the demon god, trying to wake him up. He remembers that the god needs human sacrifices and orders that all humans be taken to the demon god to be devoured. The Divine King decides to protect the people, while Yogiri promises to defend Danara and Theodosia. He tells the main demon to die, and the rest of the demons fall with him. Theodosia asks if they should just leave the goddess like that, and Yogiri says he won't interfere with her since she doesn't seem to have any ill will toward them. Suddenly, a girl appears in the tower, dragging a boy with her. She asks Rick where Yogiri is, but he tells her it's not the right time for a reunion because of the goddess. The girl looks Rick over and realizes he's become the new sword master, remembering what the previous master once told her. She says his sword now has the power to end the goddess. The Divine King says the barrier is on the verge of collapsing, so he decides it's time to face the goddess. The girl looks for Yogiri again, but the boy with her says he doesn't want to see Yogiri anymore. At that moment, he spots Danara's silhouette, and the girl realizes Yogiri is right beside her. She observes Yogiri and is so overwhelmed by his power that she starts to feel faint. She sees that Yogiri is basically the world's fate given human form. Danara recognizes the boy and asks what he's doing in the tower. He says he was brought there against his will, and though she feels dizzy, she says she'll be fine. She tells Yogiri she brought the boy for him, but Yogiri doesn't care and refuses to deal with him. The boy ends up being left behind, tired of being treated like trash, and stays alone. Yogiri takes stock of how many humans are still alive after the fight. Rick asks Theodosia why she did all that, and she says it was to avenge her people. Rick says he's now the new sword master, and she asks if he's going to follow the same corrupt path as the old one. Yogiri says they still need to investigate the underground and promises to help Theodosia seek justice. Rick thinks Yogiri is weak, but the Divine King makes it clear that only Yogiri had the power to defeat the demon god. After that, the Divine King thanks the boy for what he did, and Rick gets curious about what Yogiri really is. He asks what Yogiri plans to do next, and the boy says he's heading for the capital. In the end, everyone decides to go to the capital for their own reasons, including Theodosia. Theodosia mentions her sister's name, and the group instantly realizes who she's talking about. They decide to show her where they last saw her sister. The Divine King also gets excited about going to the capital, hoping to check if the royal bloodline still survives. Rick even suggests they all go together, but Yogiri says he's only going with Danara. Before parting ways, Rick gives them some detailed maps to help them avoid getting lost. And so, everyone heads off in a different direction, leaving the boy behind. Meanwhile, Danara watches Yogiri sleeping in the vehicle, and Mokimoko comments that she should just stay with him forever already. Danara is startled to realize Mokimoko can read her thoughts. Mokimoko is so into Yogiri's appearance that she even thinks about mixing his blood with hers. Danara says that Yogiri should be the one to make those choices for himself. When Yogiri wakes up, Danara tries to hide the fact that she was talking to Mokimoko. She starts wondering what they'll do next. Now that they're right outside the capital, Mokimoko warns that they're surrounded by soldiers. The head of security tells them to get out of the vehicle, and Danara already assumes they're going to be arrested. Yogiri says that if it comes to it, they'll fight, and Danara knows it wouldn't take long. The leader of the guard introduces himself as Torx and says the vehicle they're using belongs to the Immortal Squad. Yogiri says he's not part of that squad, explaining that they got the vehicle from the mayor. But it's clear that Torx doesn't quite trust him. Yogiri says they're candidates to become sages of Xi'an and that they're here to take the exam. Torx decides to check what abilities they have, but Danara is suspicious of the process. Yogiri tells her to trust Celestina, and then the soldier performs the test. Torx looks at the results and sees they're indeed sage candidates, but he's still wary knowing those tests can be faked. So Yogiri shows him the amulet, and everyone immediately kneels. Danara asks what that is, and he explains that Rick told him to show it to avoid trouble in the capital. He hands the amulet to Danara and says it bears the royal family's crest. Just as Torx is about to let them through, David, youngest member of the royal family, shows up and says the amulet means two things, that they know Rick, and that they are knights of the Divine King. David says the amulet doesn't give them free rein to do whatever they want, and Torx tells him to ease up. David asks to see the sacred sword Yogiri supposedly received from the Swordmaster, since he's supposedly a knight of the Divine King. Yogiri says he never got any sacred sword, and David doubts that Rick is really a master of swords. He challenges Yogiri to prove his skill with a blade, saying he won't lose to someone who can't fight, especially if that person is supposed to be the king's knight. Danara considers whether they should back off, but Mokimoko encourages her to go for it. Danara knows that fighting someone of a high fantasy tier is risky, but Mokimoko insists David isn't all that. Yogiri tells her to give it a shot, and promises that if things get complicated, he'll step in. The fight begins, and Yogiri notices that Danara's fighting style is quite different. Mokimoko explains that her family's secret technique is to fool enemies with deceptive movements. Yogiri thinks they're just staring at each other, but Mokimoko reveals Danara is already acting. She hides her left leg to make it harder to read her moves and swings her sword slightly to throw off the distance. Suddenly, Danara tosses her sword into the air, rushes past David, and hits him with a low strike. Yogiri is impressed by her technique, and Torx announces Danara as the winner, leaving everyone stunned. After the fight, Yogiri touches the castle walls and realizes they're enchanted. David explains the walls were built by an ancient mage and are resistant to all forms of attack. He's shocked when he learns Yogiri knows that mage personally. Danara asks why David is still tagging along with them. He says he wants to be the group's guide. They enter the castle, and Danara notices there are lots of martial artists inside. David explains that they're adventurers preparing to challenge the underworld, and Danara is surprised to learn the underworld actually exists. David says a Dark Lord rules over the underworld, and his minions have been trying to escape. Yogiri says they no longer need David as a guide, since they're almost at their goal. David steps away from the group. Danara comments that Yogiri was kind of cold to him. Yogiri replies that they still need to talk about how they're going to handle meeting their classmates again. Danara thinks about coming up with an excuse for leaving the bus, but Yogiri says that before anything else, she needs to decide whether or not she's going to forgive them. After that, they head to the castle to meet the king, and Yogiri is shocked by how many people are gathered there. The king begins addressing everyone, but Ushio, who also wants to become a sage, decides to challenge the king's authority. Danara is surprised by how dumb that move was, and the king says this isn't the first time a sage candidate has tried to oppose him. In fact, he says that's exactly what Ushio was expecting him to say, then draws his sword and slices off Ushio's fingers. Everyone is stunned, especially since even the time-freezing ability of the Hirage Master couldn't save Ushio this time, and the king orders silence. He goes on to say that if they want to become sages, they'll need to accomplish something truly great. The king explains that if they manage to descend to the underworld and defeat the Dark Lord, that would be considered a worthy feat for a sage. Still, the king makes it clear he doesn't believe the candidates are capable of completing a mission of that scale, but he'll do his part. He says he'll provide a base for the class, but warns them that their powers may weaken near members of the royal family. Before leaving, he tells Ushio his fingers will return to normal once they're far enough away, and then exits the room. Yogiri starts thinking about what they should do next, while Danara calls over their classmates. The group is shocked to see she's still alive, but she gets annoyed that none of them thanked Yogiri. Some of the classmates show a bit of concern, while others clearly don't care at all. Yasaki tells Yogiri and Danara that he doesn't feel guilty for leaving them behind. Yogiri doesn't care in the slightest, but Danara gets furious. She decides not to argue, knowing it would only stress her out more. She asks Yasaki if he has a problem with everyone staying in the castle. But before he can answer, Akino steps in and says that allies are already rare in this world, so everyone should be helping each other. Yogiri doesn't know who Sora is, so Danara explains that she's a super famous idol. Yasaki says he doesn't trust anyone not Yogiri, not Danara, and Akino says she understands that feeling, admitting she'd want revenge too if she were in their shoes. Later, the boys go to the dorms, and Yugo starts complaining about all the restrictions they're dealing with there. Yukimasa notices that Yogiri doesn't recognize them, and both of them introduce themselves as the class's failures. Yugo is shocked that Yogiri doesn't remember them, even though they talked a lot. He comments to Yukimasa that Yogiri's class is just insect hunter, so it's not good for much beyond squashing bugs. Yogiri asks what their skills are for and learns that Yugo is in the cook class and Yukimasa is in the reader class. Right after that, someone knocks on the door. Yugo goes to answer it and is surprised to see Fukai, who asks to speak with Yogiri. Fukai introduces himself as the god of death and tells Yogiri that he no longer needs to carry the burden of reaping souls. Yogiri is curious why Fukai came to their dorm, and Fukai reveals that he was never allowed to get close enough to look Yogiri in the eyes. Ryoko watches from a distance as Fukai suddenly rips out his own right eye, saying it used to let him see supernatural things, but it stopped working when he got near Yogiri. After that, he gets ready to leave, and Yogiri is surprised that was all he came to say. Then, Danara brings the girls over to see Yogiri, and they all step outside to talk. As soon as they're out there, Ryoko apologizes to Yogiri and tells Carol to apologize too. But Carol doesn't care at all. She's surprised to see Ryoko so nervous, since she's usually very calm. Yogiri realizes they know more about him than they let on. Carol explains that she's from the agency, Ryoko is from the institute, and Fukai is part of the cult. She says they were all sent to keep an eye on Yogiri, who had no idea he was being watched so closely. Yogiri asks Carol for more details, and she explains that Akino uses her vow-type power on the students to restrict their ability use, and they even tolerated the 3 Hirage nobles. Those 3 perverts, Ushio, Monokata, and Yadate, are known as the Hirage nobles because of their pervy abilities. Carol says they were accepted as long as they didn't freeze time, but they always suspected someone was using X-ray vision, that being Yukana's ability. And Carol also. She says Akino became the leader because Yasaki failed to unite the class. Yogiri realizes that anyone who breaks Akino's oath ends up losing their life, and Carol asks why he wants to talk to them. He says he wants to have a chat with Sion, the sage, because he thinks she might have tips on how to get back home. Carol understands that going back is the natural goal, while Ryoko believed the only way out was to become a sage. Danara hesitates, unsure if it's right to go back home with everyone together. But Yogiri thinks aiming for a major achievement is the better option because going back could cause huge chaos. Carol and Ryoko say they'll support Yogiri, and finally, the boys head down to the underground area. Yogiri is still wondering why David decided to tag along. David says he can easily restrain a weak demon's power thanks to his special royal family ability. Haruto wonders if David can also suppress others' powers, and David confirms he can. With that, he offers to guide them to where the demons are hiding. Out of nowhere, a massive 4-armed monkey attacks Yogiri. He makes an effort not to show his urge to kill and instead uses his sword to take the beast down. The other guys praise his skill. Though one of them is confused, he doesn't understand how Yogiri beat the monster in one hit, especially since his fighting style looks really amateur. Danara asks what Yogiri usually does during the day, and he casually replies that he plays video games. She gets frustrated because she spends her days slaying monsters, and Yogiri asks about the underworld. She tells him their group has already cleared the 5th floor and plans to explore the 6th next. He remembers that the 7th floor houses a dark god and wonders if defeating it will be smooth. Shortly after the 4th floor, Carol says they'll barely be able to meet the 1-month deadline. Yogiri doesn't seem too worried. He believes Sion would show up even if they fail. Yogiri then asks about Ushio's death the day before, and Ryoko reveals that it was Shinozaki who killed him and that she swore to destroy everyone in the class. Later, Danara visits Yogiri at the hideout and finds it strange that he's just standing there. He wonders if she thinks he's being lazy, but to prove he's not, he plucks a few rose petals from a vase. Danara gets curious, and he explains that he's trying to learn how to control his power. He decided to train because he knows he'll need to hold back if he wants to get any answers from the sage. Danara asks if he did anything else, and he says he just went for a walk around the city and grabbed something to eat. She thinks it's weird that he's out enjoying another world while she's getting wrecked, but he tells her he was attacked during his walk. She warns him that's dangerous, and he says he'll need her help. Danara asks why he'd need help if they're just walking around, and he says he plans to be attacked again, but this time without killing the attacker. Yogiri asks her to use her sharp vision to locate the enemy. He notices she's irritated, and she says she'll explain why if he buys her lunch. Yogiri realizes she just wants a free meal. Meanwhile, a sniper trying to take out Yogiri begs a woman to let him back out, but she orders him to finish the job. He pleads to be punished instead, but she tells him he'll only be free once he completes the mission. He fires but dies instantly. The woman then orders the operator to target Danara next. Yogiri and Danara arrive at the scene, which is completely destroyed. Danara is furious because she knows Shinozaki is behind it all. They decide to look for another location, but suddenly Danara becomes the target. Yogiri manages to save her in time. The enemy operator continues with the plan, but Yogiri says he's coming for him, scaring the guy out of his mind. Danara realizes they're being watched and doesn't know what to do. Mokumoku says she knows where the energy waves are coming from, and Danara asks if that's what's messing with her. The operator, named Ryasuke, panics, thinking Yogiri already figured out where he is. He tries to flee, but the rescue helicopter fails, forcing him to jump. At that moment, Danara strikes him mid-air and Yogiri appears in front of him. Yogiri asks him not to run, and Ryasuke instantly obeys, clearly aware of Yogiri's power. Ryasuke tries to play dumb, but Mokumoku reveals the spirit he sent after them. Danara says it's the first time she's truly acted like a protective spirit. Ryasuke can't understand how the Princess of Spirits lost, and Mokumoku tells him no spirit stands a chance against her. She even says she's already defeated the King of Spirits, infuriating him. He ends up summoning a spirit wolf, but Yogiri wipes out the beast instantly with his ability. Ryasuke still tries to summon the Queen of the Land of the Dead, but it's no use. Yogiri defeats her in no time. Out of nowhere, a woman who's actually a robot shows up to protect Ryasuke. She attacks Yogiri, but Danara saves him. Yogiri approaches the robot clone, named Indio, and disables her. Danara is full of questions about who that is, and Yogiri promises to explain later. He tells Ryasuke to spill everything he knows and starts questioning him. Ryasuke ends up revealing all the information. He swears to stop chasing after Yogiri, but Yogiri says it's useless since Ryasuke can just create new Indio clones whenever he wants. So Yogiri ends his life right there. Ryasuke begs for mercy, but Yogiri doesn't forgive him. Afterwards, Yogiri explains that Indio was a childhood friend of his, and Danara wants to know if she was a robot. Yogiri says the robot was modeled after Indio, built specifically to try and kill him. He says he wishes Indio could rest in peace, but Danara misunderstands. When he sees she's shaken, he clarifies that Indio is alive and doing well. Danara asks why he said she should rest in peace, and he explains he was referring to the robot, not the real person. Danara feels relieved, knowing she won't have to fight a copy of someone who's already gone. Later, Akino arrives and tells the group there are only 18 students left. Shinozaki took out 8 all at once. Everyone's shocked that no one could stop Shinozaki. Akino explains that Shinozaki has the upper hand by picking them off one by one, giving no chance to react. Then Akino says everyone needs to leave the kingdom immediately. People start wondering why the kingdom is going against the sage's orders. She warns that if things keep going like this, the kingdom won't hold out much longer, so she sends everyone underground to finish the mission. Yogiri and Danara go down together to the 6th floor of the underground, joined by Dave. Yogiri is curious about why Dave decided to tag along. Dave says he wanted to check out the 6th floor in person. Yogiri tells him to stay alert, but Dave says he's fine as long as Yogiri handles the Dark God. When they reach the Dark God's castle, they're greeted by a crowd of monsters. Sugoro leads the attack team, and they all push through the monsters easily. Danara finds all the celebration a little strange, but a classmate comments that everything's gotten way too easy for them. Mikoshi wonders why Danara is always sticking so close to Yogiri until she suddenly notices he's gone. Another girl says Yogiri's the loner type and doesn't like crowds. Danara thinks that's kind of cold and mean, so she heads off to find Yogiri. Meanwhile, Yogiri is playing video games alone in the forest, until he spots David walking by himself. He suspects David might be acting weird, but gets no response from him. He realizes David's heading straight into danger and runs after him to help. Yogiri tries to wake David up, but fails. Then suddenly, the ground starts to crack. The rest of the class is celebrating having made it this far without Danara, but then Sujashin shows up. She says their path has been way too easy and that no sage is going to appear like this. So, she decides to raise the difficulty. She announces that from now on, they'll have to fight each other until only one remains, leaving everyone in shock. Danara goes looking for Yogiri, but the ground opens up and she falls into a deep pit. There, she tells the others that the new trial is to eliminate classmates until just one person is left. She says the competition starts in 1 hour, and if someone doesn't defeat at least one other person in that time, Sion herself will eliminate them. Ryasuke gets a message saying the second Alpha Omega gate has been opened, and Carol notices it too. Sion warns that anyone who tries to leave the castle will die. She makes it clear whoever survives will be the winner of the trial, and the group can barely believe they now have to fight each other to the end. Fakai, the god of death, decides to take on Sion, but she couldn't care less. She says that if he manages to defeat her, the test ends immediately. Fakai tries using his powers, but nothing works. Sion explains that she just resurrects instantly. This infuriates Fakai, and he keeps trying again and again. But Sion tells him she gets stronger by the second and always recovers. She says she'll resurrect every time she's defeated, but even so, Fakai keeps going until Sion gets tired and flicks him, dealing a fatal blow and taking her out of the game in an instant. After that, Sion tells everyone there's no time to waste, and panic spreads. Danara heads deeper into the forest, trying to figure out where Yogiri went. Then Iuna and Mikoshi show up, running. They say they're in trouble, but Danara doesn't understand what's going on. Meanwhile, Yogiri is falling into a pit while holding on to Dave. He starts remembering a time when Asaka told him, back when he was a kid, about a book she'd read. The book talked about a being far beyond humans, and the word ethos came up. Asaka explained that this kind of being needs character, not morality or ethics. Young Yogiri didn't really get it, so Asaka told him that you can't expect morality from someone who surpasses humanity. She said these beings have to create their own rules, and Yogiri started wondering if he needed to do the same. Asaka said yes, just because he could have everything didn't mean he could do whatever he wanted without thinking. She told him to think carefully and choose the kind of character he wanted to have. Yogiri comes back to the present and realizes the only way he could lose is by following the rules he himself created. He remembers his promise to take Danara back to her world, and with that, he activates his power, slowing down their fall and landing safely while setting Dave gently on the ground. As soon as he realizes he's reached the 7th layer, Yogiri pulls out his phone and makes a call. He's a bit worried about whether the person on the other end can handle things, but they assure him it's all under control as long as nobody's started fighting yet. Yogiri asks to be kept updated since he'll help however he can. Suddenly, Damon appears out of nowhere, running and asking why he's being attacked. When he sees Yogiri, he immediately kneels down and apologizes, which surprises Yogiri. Damon is just as confused to see Yogiri there. Yogiri then remembers he once said he'd kill Damon if he ever saw him again, but Damon says he's never heard that before. He begs Yogiri to help deal with a brute chasing him. Yogiri handles it easily, then asks Damon if he knows how to get back to the 6th layer. Damon says it's just a matter of retracing his steps, but Yogiri explains that he fell straight into the 7th layer, so there's no way back that way. This surprises Damon a lot. Yogiri says he can slow his own fall, so he didn't get hurt. Damon's pretty impressed with Yogiri's abilities and says there's a shortcut. Yogiri asks him to lead the way. Damon agrees, as long as Yogiri offers him protection. Yogiri accepts, and as they're about to head out, Yogiri asks Damon to carry David on his back, which really annoys him. Meanwhile, Kyoko opens the map to locate the other participants. She draws her weapons and heads for the castle, silently followed by Danara. Yukamasa is tracking her moves, reading from a book that predicts her next actions. He reads that she's going to shoot him, but decides to erase that outcome, and instead makes Shinazaki enter the room with Kyoko. Mokomoko compliments Danara for suggesting they split up. She mentions that Yogiri is in the 7th layer trying to find a way back. Danara thinks she'll be safe hiding in the trees since she doesn't have any system embedded in her. But suddenly, she hears gunshots coming from the castle and realizes the fight between participants has begun. Damon leads Yogiri to an elevator, saying he'll drop him off at the 6th layer and then head up to the 1st. But Yogiri says he needs Damon to stay on the 6th with him since he doesn't know how to operate the elevator. This bums Damon out. Yukamasa reaches the elevator room and keeps checking his prediction book. He tries to open the door, but fails just as he turns to leave. The door opens, revealing Yogiri and Damon exiting with David. Yukamasa sees this as his chance to defeat them both and writes in the book to change fate and beat Yogiri. But the book only shows that he will die. He's stunned. He was supposed to have ultimate power, but can't change the result. Furious, he tears out the page, but nothing changes. The door opens, and Yogiri instantly eliminates Yukamasa. Damon is shocked to see Yogiri defeat a classmate without hesitation. Yogiri explains he only acted because he sensed Yukamasa's killing intent. He tries to call Mokomoko, but there's no answer. Damon says the system has now approved his participation in the Sage candidate selection. Yogiri says he can't leave the 6th layer because Sion doesn't allow it, which irritates Damon even more. Meanwhile, Mei is lying around thinking about taking a vacation, until Arima shows up, complaining about how lazy she is. She asks why he doesn't just finish her off already, and he says he'd feel guilty, but then he decides to act. A rock falls on her, and he thinks that settles it. The rock suddenly teleports next to him, and he sees Wabukawa is there too. Wabukawa summons a lava gate right above her, but it doesn't harm her at all, leaving them both in shock. She explains that she's immune to all attacks and even enjoys watching the look of despair on their faces. Right after that, she lands a special punch. It's extremely slow, but that single hit is enough to completely disintegrate Wabukawa, leaving Arima stunned. She explains that before the school trip, she was hit by a beam from a cat's eye, which killed her, but the cats brought her back to life and gave her powers through a cat god. Arima believes she could now fight the Sage without needing to compete in the event. But Mei says she thinks participating is fun. She ends up firing a disintegration beam at him too, and shortly after, gets a notification that Damon has entered the event, so she decides to go after him. She teleports nearby just as they're leaving the castle, surprising Damon. She asks who Yogiri is but realizes from his stance that he's here to fight. She tries to attack, but Yogiri reacts instantly and destroys one of her cats. The other cat wants revenge, and Mei tries to fight back, but suddenly loses her powers because Yogiri destroyed their source. She runs away into the forest, completely embarrassed. Meanwhile, Kyoko and Shinazaki are in the middle of a duel. Danara watches everything from the trees, hidden, and Mokumoko warns that someone is releasing spirits and that there's a lot of electromagnetic interference, so she can't contact Yogiri. Danara decides to step out of hiding and just stand still, but is immediately surrounded by spirits. Mikoshi appears, and Danara is stunned to discover she is the sorceress. Mikoshi reveals she's actually a necromancer and apologizes for keeping it a secret. Danara asks about Juna, but Mikoshi says she has no idea where she went, she just vanished. Danara wonders why Mikoshi sought her out specifically, and Mikoshi explains she's being guided by a spirit, an ancient princess named Cheno. Danara gets anxious because Mikoshi ended up with such a cool spirit while she got stuck with one that has a weird name. Mokimoko says she'll deal with Tiano if necessary, and Mikoshi jokes that Tiano is only good for narration, she'd gladly trade her for Mokimoko. Suddenly, Mokimoko moves over to Mikoshi's side, and Mikoshi starts attacking Danara, who's shocked by her strength. Mokomoko warns that Mikoshi isn't in control of her own body. She explains to Danara that she's now piloting the battle suit and activates its cleaning mode. Just then, Yogiri and Damon arrive, and Yogiri covers Damon's eyes so he won't see Danara without her armor. He then offers Danara his shirt and realizes he might need to take out Mokomoko now that she's attacking his friend. Akino is impressed by the team Yasaki has assembled. He says their goal is to become strong enough to take on Chan. Akino realizes they're challenging her directly, and Mokomoko sends Yasaki to deal with her. Yasaki asks her to surrender so he doesn't have to eliminate her, but she casually refuses. He tells his team to surround and attack, but suddenly, a bunch of fans appear behind them, all cheering for Akino. Yasaki orders his team to attack the fans, but the fans end up blowing themselves up to take out part of his group, leaving everyone stunned. Several fans explode near Yasaki, and Haruto realizes things are getting serious. Suddenly, a giant blob devours everything except for Haruto. The others beg for help, but Haruto activates his secret move and saves himself, leaving the rest in a tight spot. Mikoshi is still frozen in fear of Yogiri, but then a voice tells her she's way stronger than she thinks because she's a necromancer. She realizes she's awakening a new power and releases Mokimoko. She's shocked by the strength she now feels, and Yogiri grows curious about what's going on. Mokimoko explains that Mikoshi is going through an awakening. Mikoshi feels so powerful, she thinks she can control everything. She tries to attack Danara, but Yogiri uses his deadly ability to take her out. Danara asks Mokimoko to return her suit, feeling bad that Mikoshi had to die, but even so, she decides to continue the challenge. Damon suggests she should be a bit more understanding, clearly trying to get some advantage. Yogiri decides to look for a way out of the 6th layer to see if it draws Mokimoko's attention. But Damon's not too fond of the idea, he's afraid it'll backfire on him. Elsewhere, Shin Nozaki is about to defeat Kyoko, but in a moment of desperation, Kyoko summons a massive weapon. Carol and Ryoko join Yogiri because they just want to survive. Yogiri explains his plan to get Sion's attention, but suddenly, the sky turns red and he tells everyone to take cover. The area is hit by a massive explosion and everything descends into chaos. Shin Nozaki knocks Kyoko down. Before it's over, Kyoko desperately tries to summon the weapon capable of defeating her. In her panic, she screams and a massive container suddenly appears in front of her, shocking Shin Nozaki. Yogiri decides to call Sion to gather information, but once again the sky turns red and he tells everyone to take cover. Haruto watches everything from a distance and realizes he needs to change his strategy, because the situation has gotten seriously dangerous. A sudden light appears, catching him off guard, followed by a massive explosion all around. Kyoko wakes up, confused and disoriented, not understanding what just happened. Her medical system informs her that over 60% of her body has been destroyed, and she's now entering a stasis state. She orders the system to do something, and it says there are only 2 options: suspend all systems and wait for her to recover, or use Dragon Heal for a full recovery. Kyoko tells it to go with the second option, but the system warns that this will cause irreversible changes. It explains that if she chooses this path, she'll eventually become a dragon. Even so, Kyoko approves and recites the command. Instantly, she transforms into a dragon, leaving Danara confused about what just happened. Yogiri deduces that someone set off an annihilation bomb in the area. He explains that this kind of bomb creates a massive explosion that destroys everything nearby and also eliminates any nanomachines in its range. Danara is baffled by how much he knows about all this. Ryoko gets worried because the second gate is acting weird, but Yogiri is more focused on the people leaving the trial zone, which really irritates Danara. Meanwhile, Shinozaki decides to continue her path of revenge. She wonders if the people she wants to take down have already been defeated, and with that doubt, she chooses to check it out, hoping it'll calm her thirst for vengeance. Her planning unit warns that search powers are currently limited, but tells her she can activate the Dragon Warrior power to get there. Shinozaki uses the ability and begins losing her teeth. Each tooth that falls transforms into a perfect human clone of herself. Her planning unit explains that these clones will assist in the hunt. Damon is frozen in fear until he hears a group approaching. When he looks, he sees a crowd of Shinozaki clones marching toward the group. He warns the others, but they don't understand what those clones are. Danara suspects it's Shinozaki herself. Then Shinozaki's planning unit detects 5 survivors and commands the clones to attack, but they all collapse at once. Shinozaki is confused, and her combat unit warns her not to waste more troops. Something strange is happening. The planning unit identifies the presence of Alpha Omega and starts questioning how he could detect them even during Phase 2. The medical unit reminds them that the barrier might have stopped working ever since she turned into a dragon. The planning system is surprised, since these units were only created in case humanity was wiped out by Alpha Omega, meaning he shouldn't even know they exist. The combat unit advises retreat, but Shinozaki is outraged at the suggestion of such a shameful withdrawal. She's furious for having sacrificed her beautiful body to become a weird dragon, only for it to be pointless in the end. She refuses to let the survivors escape, especially when they're within reach of her claws. Unable to accept it, she starts questioning what her new purpose is. The survivors quickly realize she's flying toward them, and Danara recognizes that the dragon looks exactly like the one that attacked them on the bus, back when they first arrived in this crazy world. Shinozaki prepares to launch a massive fireball at them, but her combat unit tries to stop her. She ignores the warning and continues the attack. But Yogiri uses his deadly ability and takes her out instantly. She passes out, and her systems remain active for a moment before shutting down. Danara approaches the clones and realizes they're all perfect copies of Shinozaki. Damon says they have to keep moving, even though they have no idea what's coming next. Yogiri agrees, and the group continues forward. Damon notices the place is completely empty and comments that even Sion must be lost in all this. And then suddenly, Sion appears and says she understands everything that's going on. Leaving him stunned, Yogiri recognizes her as one of the sages, and she instantly realizes he's the guy who swore to eliminate her. Yogiri aims for her ankle and takes her down immediately. He says he needs answers and asks her to pay attention. She tries to use her power on him, but he blocks it effortlessly. He warns her to stop threatening him, or he might end up killing her by accident since he's holding back. He says not even the instant death ability can stop her heart and demands to know how they can return to their original world. Yogiri pries her fingers open and says he can tear off more if she doesn't answer, and suddenly, she vanishes. Damon wonders why he let her escape using teleportation. He's worried she might suddenly reappear, but Yogiri assures him everything is under control. Sion arrives at the castle and senses something extremely strange going on. She rips off her malfunctioning hand and grows a new one in its place, but that one's also useless. Yogiri begins shutting her down, and she hesitates, realizing she might die anyway, so she finally responds to Yogiri. Yoshi enters the room to help Sion, but suddenly loses movement in his hands and feet. He begs Sion for help, and she decides to teleport back to plead with Yogiri not to harm Yoshi. Yogiri explains that he just wants to talk and promises not to attack her anymore if she answers his questions. He's already figured out that she knows he can strike her no matter where she is even targeting her data. Everyone is both terrified of what he can do and relieved he's on their side. He asks her to explain how to return home, but she says there's currently no way to do that. Yogiri counters, saying Damon managed to go back home when he first arrived in this world. Sion explains that it was only possible back then because there was still a connection between the two worlds. Yogiri asks if that connection was broken, and Sion confirms, saying the world used to be much more fragile, which allowed for such a link. He then asks for their world's coordinates, and a screen appears displaying them. Moko decides to memorize everything and tries to convince Danara that she's a key piece in helping everyone return home. Yogiri now realizes it is possible to go back as long as they have the right coordinates and enough energy for the trip. He asks Sion how to obtain that required energy, and she hands him a philosopher's stone, explaining he'll need several of them to power the journey. Yogiri is surprised she gave up such a valuable item so easily, but Sion says she doesn't need it, it's useless to her now. Yogiri then wonders if all the other sages he fought also had these stones. Sion confirms, but adds that when they die, the stone loses its energy. She then reveals that the stone is what grants immortality to the sages. Yogiri asks where the other sages are, but Sion says she has no idea where they might be. Next, Yogiri turns to Damon and asks about the exit, and Damon says there's a location marked on the map. Damon is shocked to see that Yogiri is actually letting Sion live. Yogiri says he won't kill her, even though he has every reason to. This leaves Damon speechless, amazed that even after everything, Yogiri still shows mercy to those who caused him so much suffering. The two leave, leaving Sion behind, and she remembers she still needs to help Yogiri. As she tries to fly away, a red jelly suddenly emerges from the ground, catching her off guard. She tries to shake it off, but eventually decides it's better to just return to Yogiri. However, when she tries to teleport, she realizes she can't. The jelly has stuck to her leg. Confused, she suddenly hears Mana speaking to her. Mana says she thought her immune system was reacting to something important, but it turns out Sion is nothing more than a fake sage. Sion asks if Mana is really a goddess of darkness and tries to fly, abandoning her own leg to be consumed by the jelly. She realizes the entire sage trial might have been a mistake. She tries teleporting again, but loses control and falls straight into Mana's jelly. Mana mocks Sion for building a system just to pretend she's a sage. Sion realizes she's lost almost all her power, and Mana decides to use her to feed her brother. Sion doesn't understand what's happening, but then the jelly begins devouring her, and there's not much she can do. As a final act, Sion tries warning Mana about Yogiri, saying he'll defeat her too. Just before being completely swallowed by the jelly, she thinks of Yogiri one last time. Suddenly, two giant robots appear in the capital, but a smaller robot tries to take one of them on. The small one attacks one of the giants, but it instantly regenerates, while the other begins destroying everything. Out of nowhere, though, it's consumed by the red jelly. The substance starts spreading through the entire city, and Ricky realizes the danger. He decides to evacuate the soldiers before they too get caught in the jelly. Ricky decides to act like a true noble and charges at the jelly with everything he's got. The soldiers start praising him, saying he's got what it takes to become a true sword master, but Ricky knows he's not really making much of a difference. The jelly begins moving toward them, and he starts wondering if the sage candidates accidentally unleashed the god of darkness. Olares watches the scene with satisfaction as the jelly takes over the capital, saying it's great to finally see Mana make her appearance. Damon gathers everyone and is surprised they found a shortcut. Yogiri uses his death power, and Damon wants to understand why he took out Olares without waiting. Yogiri explains he sensed Olares' killing intent and decided to act first. Yogiri asks where they are, and David explains they've reached the Divine King's throne. Danara notices the jelly is swallowing everything, and Carol points out it's about to breach the city walls. When the jelly invades fully, Damon takes full responsibility. Danara asks why, and he explains that Mana is the goddess of darkness who was sealed down below, and that this is all his fault for breaking the seal. Yogiri now understands why Damon was so desperate to get out, but the jelly makes moving around more difficult. Suddenly, the jelly gathers around them and Mana's face appears. She recognizes Damon, surprising Yogiri, and tells Damon to take her straight to Yogiri, the one who killed her brother. Without hesitation, Damon hands over Yogiri, leaving both Danara and Yogiri disappointed. Mana charges at Yogiri, but he defeats her instantly. Damon starts praising him, but Danara wants to know what they're going to do about all the jelly. David suggests they get to the rooftop, where they reveal a spaceship. Yogiri apologizes to Damon, saying he can't bring everyone, the ship only holds 5 people. Mokumoku volunteers to stay behind while the others board, which surprises Danara. Mokumoku wants to test her new armor, which embarrasses Danara because it's super revealing. Yogiri asks how they're supposed to fly, and Mokumoku says Danara can carry him if she holds on tight. He grabs her without thinking, and Danara is shocked by how shameless he is. Danara flies over the capital, cape flowing like a superhero, and Yogiri asks what they're going to do next. Danara thinks they should take a break after everything, and David offers to help them get to a nearby town. But then Danara realizes Damon is missing. Carol and Ryoko decide to come along, but Yogiri says he's only gathering enough energy for himself and Danara to return home. Danara is startled, but he explains that he can't take responsibility for more people, and the 2 girls accept that calmly. Yogiri asks Danara for a ride because he's sleepy, but she refuses. Ryoko offers to carry him, saying she has to protect him at all costs, which annoys Danara. Soon after, a carriage shows up and Leslie jumps out, running straight to Yogiri and proposing to him. He refuses, saying he doesn't want to be tied down for life. Even Adisha and Euphemia show up too, catching him off guard. Leslie even offers him a philosopher's stone if he'll at least hear her out. Meanwhile, the Divine King watches the chaos Yogiri left behind. He realizes he can't ignore someone that powerful. A robot then arrives, picks up Haruto, and vanishes with him into the stars. Damon runs through the forest, plotting to build his own harem world. Danara sits in the carriage with Yogiri resting on her lap. He dreams of Arasaka telling him to use his power on those he dislikes and to make his own rules instead of following what everyone else calls justice. Danara glances over and sees Leslie glaring with jealousy at how close she is to Yogiri. And that's where our video ends. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Drop a like and comment down below if you've already watched this anime. That's it for now, take care, and see you in the next video.